2 days before my son's wedding, I bought a dress, shoes, and earrings. That's when I received a message from a hidden number. Don't go to the wedding, your daughter-in-law planned. I froze and called back. At that moment, a woman revealed to me that my daughter-in-law actually... I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I had everything ready. The navy blue dress with the delicate pearl buttons, the matching shoes I'd bought after trying on 6 different pairs, and the earrings that had belonged to my mother. Everything was perfect for my son Darren's wedding in just 2 days. At 64, I thought I'd seen enough of life to handle whatever came my way. I'd raised Darren alone after his father died when he was 12, worked double shifts at the hospital to put him through college, and watched with pride as he built his successful accounting practice. Now, at 32, he was marrying Romy, a beautiful 28-year-old woman who seemed to adore him. I was folding the dress tissue paper when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? I answered, expecting a telemarketer. Is this Marlene Richards? The voice was female, nervous with a slight southern accent. Yes. Who is this? Please don't hang up. I know this will sound crazy, but you cannot let your son marry that woman. My blood went cold. Excuse me? Who is this? Your future daughter-in-law isn't who she says she is. Romy isn't her real name, and she's already married. Has been for 3 years. I nearly dropped the phone. That's impossible. You're lying. I wish I was. Listen to me carefully, Mrs. Richards. Romy's real name is Rachel Morrison, and she married my brother Thomas in Atlanta 3 years ago. They never divorced. She left him cleaned out and moved on to your son. My hands started shaking. Why should I believe you? You won't even tell me your name. Because if she finds out I called you, she'll disappear and take everything your son has signed over to her. And trust me, there's a lot. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean signed over? The house, the business shares, bank accounts. She's been working on him for months. My brother fell for the same routine. Sweet, helpless, needed protecting. By the time Thomas realized what was happening, she'd transferred almost everything into joint accounts and then into her name only. I sank into my kitchen chair, the wedding dress sliding to the floor. This can't be true. Darren would have told me about any major financial decisions. The woman's laugh was bitter. Would he? When's the last time you two really talked? I mean, really talked. Not just surface conversation about the weather and his work. The question stung because it was true. Ever since Romy came into the picture 18 months ago, my conversations with Darren had become shorter, more superficial. He used to call me twice a week, visit every Sunday for dinner. Now I was lucky to get a quick check-in call every 2 weeks. She's been isolating him, the woman continued. Same pattern she used with Thomas. Makes the man feel like his family doesn't understand their special connection. Suddenly, she's the only one who really gets him. I thought about the last few family gatherings. How Romy would steer conversations away from family memories, always redirecting attention to herself and her relationship with Darren. How she'd developed sudden headaches whenever I suggested one-on-one time with my son. Even if what you're saying is true, I managed, why call me? Why not the police? Because bigamy is hard to prove when she's this careful. She never technically divorced Thomas, but she also made sure there's no paper trail leading back to Atlanta. And your son won't believe it without solid proof. Thomas didn't either, not until it was too late. My mind raced. What kind of proof? Marriage certificate? Photos? Bank records? I have copies of everything, but I need time to get them to you safely. She can't know I'm involved. Where is your brother now? A long pause. Thomas took his own life 6 months after she cleaned him out. He lost everything. His business, his house, his savings, all of it gone. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Oh my God. I couldn't save my brother, but maybe I can save your son. Meet me tomorrow night. Riverside Park near the old bandstand. 10 o'clock. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this call. Wait, I don't even know your name. Sarah. Sarah Morrison. And Mrs. Richards? Be very careful around Romy from now on. Don't let her know you suspect anything. She's more dangerous than she looks. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for several minutes. my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Everything Sarah had said felt impossible, like something from a television drama, not real life. But the details she'd provided, the way she knew about Darren's business, his financial situation, it was too specific to be a random scam. I tried calling the number back. It went straight to a generic voicemail recording. No name, no personal message. I spent the rest of the evening pacing my small living room, replaying every interaction I'd had with Romy over the past 18 months. The way she'd appeared in Duran's life so suddenly, claiming to be new in town for a teaching position that I'd never been able to verify. How she always seemed to need Darren's help with everything. Her car, her apartment, her finances. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about her background. She claimed to be from Tennessee, but her accent came and went. She said her parents were dead, no siblings, no close friends from her past. For someone supposedly starting fresh in a new city, she'd integrated into Darren's life with remarkable speed. I remembered the first time I'd met her, 8 months ago at Darren's birthday dinner. She'd been charming, deferential, calling me Mrs. Richards even after I'd told her to call me Marlene. She'd brought homemade brownies and complimented everything about my house. Perfect behavior for meeting the mother. Too perfect, I now realized. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Sarah Morrison's voice telling me about her brother's suicide. By morning, I'd made my decision. I had to know the truth, even if it meant discovering that my son was marrying a woman who could destroy him. One day before the wedding, and I was about to uncover secrets that would change everything. I spent the entire next morning trying to act normal, but every fiber of my being was screaming with anxiety. The wedding was tomorrow, and I had a meeting with Sarah Morrison that could either save my son or destroy what was left of our relationship. Darren called around noon to confirm the rehearsal dinner details. His voice sounded strained, tired in a way that made my chest tighten with worry. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just wedding stress, Mom. You know how it is. Romy's been pretty overwhelmed with all the last-minute details. I wanted to ask him about their finances, about any papers he might have signed recently, but I bit my tongue. Sarah's warning echoed in my mind. Don't let her know you suspect anything. Is there anything I can help with? I offered. Actually, Romy was hoping you could pick up her aunt's dress from the dry cleaner. Her aunt flew in from Nashville this morning and doesn't have a car. Another convenient relative appearing at the last minute. I'd noticed that pattern with Romy. Family members and friends who were always just out of reach, visiting briefly or living too far away to verify. Of course, what's the name on the order? Morrison, Rachel Morrison. My blood turned to ice. The name Sarah had given me as Romy's real identity. When Darren said it so casually, without any explanation about why his fiancée would have a different last name on a dry cleaning order, every doubt I'd been harboring crystallized into cold certainty. Mom, you still there? Yes, sorry, just writing down the address. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, too high and tight. Morrison, you said? Yeah, that's her aunt's name. Rachel's picking it up for her because they have the same first name and it's easier that way. The lie was so smooth, so rehearsed. I wondered how many other small deceptions I'd overlooked, dismissed as innocent quirks or simple misunderstandings. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside the dry cleaner for 20 minutes, gathering courage. Inside, I approached the counter with shaking hands. I'm here to pick up for Morrison, I said. The teenage clerk barely looked up. First name? Rachel. She disappeared into the back and returned with a dress bag. As she handed it to me, I caught sight of the receipt stapled to the plastic. The order had been placed 6 months ago, long before any out-of-town aunt would have known about the wedding. But more damning was the credit card information at the bottom. The payment had been made with a card in the name Rachel Morrison, not Rachel's aunt's card. Romy had been using that name for months. I drove to Darren's house with my heart hammering against my ribs. He was at work, but I knew where he kept his spare key. I'd helped him buy this house 5 years ago, contributed $15,000 toward the down payment, because I wanted him to have something stable, something his own. The house felt different as I walked through it. Romy's belongings had gradually taken over every room. Expensive clothes filled the closets, designer handbags lined the shelves, and the kitchen counters were covered with high-end appliances I knew Darren couldn't afford on his accountant's salary. In the guest bedroom, where Romy sometimes stayed when she worked late at her supposed teaching job, I found what I was looking for. Hidden in the bottom drawer of the nightstand, underneath a stack of magazines, was a manila folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents that made my worst fears look optimistic. A marriage certificate from Fulton County, Georgia, dated 3 years ago. Rachel Morrison and Thomas Morrison. The photo showed Romy, though her hair was shorter and darker. Same green eyes, same heart-shaped face. Bank statements showing transfers from Thomas Morrison's accounts to Rachel Morrison's accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved systematically over an 18-month period. Property deeds showing Thomas Morrison's house and business being transferred to Rachel Morrison 6 months before their separation. And most chilling of all, a death certificate for Thomas Morrison, dated 8 months ago. Cause of death: suicide by overdose. But there was more. Recent documents with Darren's name. Mortgage papers showing him refinancing the house and adding Rachel Morrison as a co-owner. Bank account changes making her a joint holder with full withdrawal rights. Life insurance policies with her as the sole beneficiary. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take multiple shots to get clear images. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just bigamy. This was a calculated, systematic destruction of my son's financial life. As I was putting the documents back, I heard a car in the driveway. Panic shot through me as I recognized Romy's silver sedan. I shoved the folder back into place and rushed to the living room, grabbing the dress from the dry cleaner as my alibi. "Marlene?" Romy's voice called from the front door. "What are you doing here?" She appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair perfect despite the July heat, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her smile was bright and warm, the same expression she'd worn at every family gathering for the past 18 months. "Darren asked me to drop off your aunt's dress," I said, holding up the garment bag with hands I prayed weren't visibly shaking. "Oh, you're such a sweetheart." She moved closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume. "Aunt Rachel will be so grateful. She's been so worried about having something appropriate to wear." The casualness with which she lied was terrifying. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew, I could see something cold and calculating behind those green eyes that I'd somehow missed before. "Where is your aunt staying?" I asked, testing her. "At the Marriott downtown. She's not used to traveling much, so she wanted somewhere familiar." Another smooth lie, delivered without a moment's hesitation. "I'd love to meet her before the wedding." "Oh, she's pretty shy around new people. Very private person. But maybe at the reception." Romy moved to guide me toward the door. "You should probably get going. I know you still have so much to prepare for tomorrow." As she ushered me out, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. On the kitchen counter was a stack of papers, and the top one was clearly a life insurance policy. I could see Darren's name and what looked like a very large number, something in the hundreds of thousands. "Marlene?" Romy's voice had an edge now. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just wedding jitters, I suppose. You know how mothers are." "Of course." Her expression softened, but I noticed how her hand remained on the door handle, clearly wanting me gone. "Tomorrow will be perfect. Darren is so lucky to have a mother who cares so much." As I drove away, those words echoed in my mind with sinister undertones. I thought about Thomas Morrison, whose own family had probably said similar things right up until the day he killed himself. The meeting with Sarah Morrison couldn't come soon enough. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I needed to figure out how to save my son from a woman who had already destroyed one family. The wedding was less than 24 hours away, and I was running out of time. Riverside Park at 10 o'clock at night was eerily quiet. The old bandstand sat empty under a flickering streetlight, casting long shadows across the weathered wooden benches. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, my nerves stretched so tight I jumped at every sound. A cat rustling through bushes, distant traffic, the soft splash of something in the creek. I clutched my purse containing the photos I'd taken of the documents, evidence of a deception so elaborate it made my head spin. The wedding was in 14 hours, and I still had no idea how to stop it without destroying my relationship with Darren forever. "Mrs. Richards?" I turned to see a woman approaching from the parking area. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short brown hair and tired eyes that reminded me painfully of my son's expression lately. "Sarah Morrison?" She nodded, glancing nervously around the empty park before sitting on the bench beside me. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I found documents," I said without preamble. "In Darren's house. Marriage certificate, bank records, property transfers. Everything you said was true." Sarah's shoulders sagged with what looked like relief mixed with exhaustion. I was hoping I was wrong, that maybe she'd changed, but she shook her head. "She never changes. This is what she does." She reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This is everything I have about Rachel. Her real background, what she did to Thomas, and what I've been able to find out about your son's situation." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first item was a color photograph showing Romy, Rachel, with a man who looked eerily similar to Darren. Same height, same build, same kind and trusting expression. "That's Thomas 6 months before he died," Sarah said quietly. "She has a type. Successful men, usually self-employed or with substantial assets, typically without close family ties or anyone who might ask too many questions." I studied the photo. Thomas wore the same besotted expression I'd seen on Darren's face whenever Romy was around. Complete adoration. Total trust. How did she find them? Darren, Thomas, the others? "Others?" Sarah's voice was sharp. "How many others do you think there were?" "I don't know. I just assumed there were 3 before Thomas that I know of. Richard Caldwell in Birmingham, Marcus Webb in Charlotte, and David Chen in Tampa. All died within 2 years of marrying her. Richard and Marcus were ruled suicides. David was a car accident, and Thomas was an overdose." The photographs slipped from my numb fingers. 4 men, 4 dead husbands. She's very careful. Never the same method twice. Always different states, different time frames. And she never stays Rachel Morrison long enough for anyone to connect the dots. I only found the pattern because Thomas kept detailed financial records, and I spent months tracking the money trail after he died. I felt sick. What about the police? Surely someone must have noticed. She's incredibly careful about jurisdiction. Each death happens in a different state, investigated by different departments. And she always has alibis. She's either out of town visiting her sick mother, or at a work conference, or taking care of some emergency. Always documented, always verifiable. The papers in the envelope told a horrifying story. Financial records showing the systematic draining of bank accounts. Property transfers completed just weeks before each man's death. Life insurance policies with Rachel as the sole beneficiary, totaling millions of dollars across 4 victims. "The teaching job," I said, pieces clicking together. "Darren said she's a substitute teacher, but I never could verify where she worked." "She's not a teacher. She works as a traveling pharmaceutical sales rep, which gives her the perfect cover for frequent travel and flexible schedules. She can disappear for days at a time without raising suspicion, and she has access to medications that could easily be used to stage an overdose." My blood went cold. Darren takes medication for his back. Prescription painkillers from when he hurt himself playing tennis last year. Sarah nodded grimly. Thomas was on similar medication for chronic migraines. Very easy to make an accidental overdose look intentional when someone's already taking the same class of drugs. I looked at the marriage certificate again, focusing on the date. If she married Thomas 3 years ago and never divorced him, then she can't legally marry Darren tomorrow. That's the only thing working in our favor. The marriage won't be legal, which means any property transfers or financial changes based on their married status could be challenged. But she's been very careful to get most of the important transfers completed before the wedding. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out another folder, this one containing documents I recognized from Darren's house. I've been monitoring public records. In the past 6 months, your son has transferred ownership of his house to joint names with Rachel Morrison. He's also changed the beneficiaries on his life insurance policies, his retirement accounts, and his business partnership agreement. Everything now goes to her if something happens to him. The scope of it was breathtaking. How did she convince him to do all this? The same way she convinced the others. She makes them feel like protectors, like heroes. She creates emergencies that require their help, sick relatives who need money, legal problems that require a cosigner, business opportunities that need quick decisions. And she always frames it as temporary, just until she gets back on her feet. I thought about all the times Darren had mentioned helping Romy with various crises over the past year. Her car breaking down and needing expensive repairs. Her landlord trying to evict her unfairly. Her student loans going into default and threatening her teaching certification. She's been planning this for 18 months, I realized. Every crisis, every emergency, it was all designed to get him to sign things. The wedding is just the final step, Sarah confirmed. Once they're married, she becomes his legal next of kin. If something happens to him, she inherits everything automatically, and there's no one with legal standing to challenge it. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think she's planning to kill him soon after the wedding? I think your son is in immediate danger. With Thomas, the overdose happened 6 weeks after their wedding. She waited just long enough for the marriage to seem stable and loving to outside observers. I stared at the evidence scattered across the bench between us, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of what we were dealing with. What do I do? If I tell Darren, he'll think I'm crazy. He's completely under her spell. I've been thinking about that. We need irrefutable proof that he can't dismiss or rationalize away, something that forces him to see her for what she really is. Like what? Sarah reached into her bag again and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been following Rachel for the past month, trying to gather evidence. Last week, I overheard her on a phone call with someone, discussing the timeline for your son's death. She was very specific about the method and the timing. My hands shook as I took the recorder. She actually said she was going to kill him? Not in those exact words. She's too careful for that. But the meaning was clear. She referred to the Thomas solution and mentioned that she'd learned from her previous mistakes about timing. The thought of this woman discussing my son's murder so casually made me feel physically ill. Who was she talking to? I don't know. Someone who's helping her, maybe providing the drugs or helping with the alibis. There's definitely someone else involved, but I haven't been able to identify them yet. I looked at the recorder, knowing it contained the key to saving Darren's life, but uncertain how to use it effectively. Will this be enough to convince him? It has to be. Because Mrs. Richards, if we can't stop this wedding tomorrow, your son is going to die. And Rachel Morrison is going to disappear with his money, his property, and his life, just like she did with my brother. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a crushing burden. In less than 14 hours, I had to find a way to save my son from a woman who had successfully murdered 4 other men. The wedding was tomorrow morning, and time was running out. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at the evidence Sarah had given me, listening to the recorded conversation over and over until every chilling word was burned into my memory. The Thomas solution worked perfectly. Quick, clean, no questions asked. But I learned my lesson about timing. 6 weeks was too soon. This time I'll wait at least 3 months, maybe 4. Let everyone see how happy we are first. The casual tone in which Romy discussed my son's planned murder made my blood turn to ice every time I heard it. By 7 in the morning, I'd made my decision. I couldn't wait for the wedding ceremony to expose her. I had to confront Darren immediately, before Romy could manipulate the situation further. I drove to his house, knowing he'd be getting ready for the ceremony. The morning was already hot and humid, promising another scorching July day. Under normal circumstances, I would have been excited, nervous in the way mothers are when their children reach major milestones. Instead, I felt like I was driving to a funeral. Darren's car was in the driveway, but so was Romy's sedan. My heart sank. I'd hoped to catch him alone. I rang the doorbell, clutching Sarah's envelope of evidence and the digital recorder. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped everything. Romy answered the door wearing a silk robe, her hair in curlers, looking every inch the glowing bride-to-be. Her smile was radiant and welcoming. "Marlene, you're here early. We weren't expecting anyone for another 2 hours. I need to talk to Darren. It's important." Something flickered across her expression, too quick for me to identify. "Of course. He's upstairs getting dressed. Come in, come in." She led me into the living room, the same space where I'd discovered the hidden documents just yesterday. Everything looked normal, peaceful. Wedding gifts were arranged on the side table, flowers filled every vase, and soft music played from hidden speakers. "Can I get you some coffee? You look tired, honey." The endearment felt like poison coming from her lips. I wondered how many times she'd called Thomas's sister honey, or Richard's mother, or any of the other family members she'd charmed while planning their loved ones' deaths. "I just need to see Darren." "Darren!" She called up the stairs. "Your mother's here." I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor above, then his voice drifting down. "Mom? Everything okay?" "She says it's important," Romy called back, then turned to me with that perfect smile. "Wedding day nerves, I bet. It's so sweet how much you care about him." When Darren appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his undershirt and dress pants, I felt my heart break a little. He looked so young, so happy, so completely oblivious to the danger he was in. "Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I glanced at Romy, who was watching me with those calculating green eyes. "I need to speak with you privately. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Romy. We're going to be married in 5 hours. That's exactly what I need to talk to you about." I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to detonate a bomb that would change everything. "Darren, Romy is already married. She has been for 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Darren's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. "Mom, what the hell are you talking about?" Romy's reaction was perfect, exactly what I would have expected from an innocent person falsely accused. Her face went pale, her hand flew to her throat, and she took a step backward as if I'd physically struck her. "Marlene, I don't understand. What are you saying?" I pulled out the marriage certificate, my hands still trembling. "Her real name is Rachel Morrison, and she married Thomas Morrison in Atlanta 3 years ago. They never divorced." Darren practically flew down the stairs, his face flushing red with anger. "Are you completely out of your mind?" "Look at the document," I insisted, holding it out to him. "Look at the signature. Look at the photo." He grabbed the paper, studying it with the careful eye of an accountant. I watched his expression change as he recognized Romy's face in the wedding photo, even with the different hair color. "This is obviously fake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone photoshopped this to mess with us. There's more." I pulled out the bank records, the property transfers, the death certificate. Thomas Morrison died 8 months ago. Suicide, after she drained his accounts and took everything he owned. Romy was crying now, perfect tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't believe you're doing this. On our wedding day. How could you be so cruel?" "Because she's done this before," I pressed on, despite seeing the doubt and anger growing in Darren's eyes. 4 other men, Darren. 4 other marriages. 4 other deaths. She's a killer. "Stop it!" Darren's voice cracked like a whip. "Just stop it right now. I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but listen to this." I fumbled with the digital recorder, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Sarah Morrison recorded this conversation. Listen to her talk about the Thomas solution. Listen to her plan your death. The recording crackled to life, Romy's voice clear and unmistakable as she discussed timing and methods with her unknown accomplice. The words hung in the air like poison. Darren went completely still, his face drained of all color as he listened to the woman he loved casually planning his murder. When the recording ended, the silence was suffocating. Romy had stopped crying. Her expression had changed completely, the mask of innocent shock falling away to reveal something cold and calculating. "You have no idea what you've done," she said quietly, her voice completely different now. Gone was the sweet, slightly vulnerable tone she always used. This voice was flat, emotionless, deadly. Darren looked between us, his world crashing down around him. "Romy? What? What is this?" She laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Your mother is a very persistent woman, Darren. Much more so than Thomas's family was." The casual admission hit him like a physical blow. I watched my son's face crumble as he realized the truth. "You're really married to someone else?" "Was married. Thomas is dead now, so technically I'm a widow." She moved toward the kitchen, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Though I suppose bigamy charges could still be filed if someone were vindictive enough." "The bank accounts," Darren said, his voice hollow. "The house, the insurance policies. You made me sign everything over to you. I made you sign papers to protect our future together." Her tone was patient, almost condescending. "Everything I did was for us. By planning to kill me?" She shrugged, reaching into her purse. "Eventually, though I was going to wait longer this time. I really do care about you, Darren. More than the others." The casual way she discussed his planned murder was more terrifying than any threat. I realized we were dealing with someone completely without conscience, someone who viewed murder as simply another business transaction. "We need to call the police," I said, reaching for my phone. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice came from behind us. I turned to see a man I didn't recognize standing in the doorway. Tall, thin, wearing a paramedic's uniform. He was holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Romy, we need to go. Now." She nodded calmly. "Michael's right. This has gotten too complicated." I realized with growing horror that we were trapped. The accomplice from the phone call was here, and they had obviously planned for the possibility of exposure. "You're not going anywhere," Darren said, finding his voice. But I could see the fear in his eyes as he looked at the syringe. "Actually, we are." Romy's smile was sharp as a blade. "But don't worry, this will all be over soon." The wedding was supposed to start in 4 hours, but I had the sinking feeling that none of us would live to see it. The man with the syringe, Michael, moved closer, and I could see the paramedic badge on his uniform was real. My blood turned cold as I realized how perfectly they'd planned this. Who would question a paramedic responding to an emergency call? 2 overdoses in one house, Romy said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. A mother and son, overcome with stress about the wedding. Such a tragedy. The bride will be devastated, of course. But these things happen. Darren stepped protectively in front of me, but I could see his hands shaking. "You won't get away with this. People know Mom came here this morning." "Actually, no one knows that," Michael said in a calm, professional tone. "Your mother called the house phone 20 minutes ago, upset and threatening to expose some imaginary scandal. She was clearly having a mental breakdown. Romy tried to calm her down, but when she arrived here, she became violent and dangerous. The scenario was horrifyingly plausible. I realized they'd been planning contingencies all along, ready to adapt their murder plot if anything went wrong. The syringe contains a mixture of fentanyl and midazolam, Romy explained clinically. Very quick, very peaceful. And given your mother's recent erratic behavior, everyone will assume she gave it to you first, then took it herself. A murder-suicide brought on by psychotic break. I thought about Sarah Morrison waiting somewhere for my call, about the evidence scattered across my kitchen table, about all the family members of Romy's previous victims who deserved justice. If we died here, she would disappear again, find another victim, and the cycle would continue. "The recording," I said desperately. "Sarah Morrison has copies of everything. Even if you kill us, she'll go to the police." Romy's smile didn't waver. "Sarah Morrison died in a car accident 3 days ago. Tragic timing, really. She was so distraught about her brother's anniversary that she wasn't paying attention to the road." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, who had risked everything to warn me, who had spent months gathering evidence against this monster, was dead, and I was probably the only person left who knew the truth. "You killed her too," Darren said, his voice hollow with realization. "Michael handled that. He's very good with cars." Romy checked her watch. "We really do need to hurry. The wedding guests will start arriving in 3 hours, and I need time to play the devastated bride whose fiancé and future mother-in-law tragically died just before the ceremony." Michael moved closer with the syringe, and I knew we had seconds before this was over. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself toward the coffee table where the evidence was scattered, grabbing my phone and hitting the emergency call button. 911, what's your emergency? Help! 23 Maple Drive. They're trying to kill us. Rachel Morrison is a murderer. Michael lunged for me, but Darren tackled him, sending the syringe flying across the room. The two men crashed into the side table, wedding gifts scattering everywhere. "This is Officer Martinez responding to 23 Maple Drive. Are you still there?" "Yes." "Rachel Morrison, also known as Romy, she's killed 4 men. She was going to kill my son. The evidence is here." Romy was moving toward the kitchen, probably looking for another weapon or an escape route. But I could already hear sirens in the distance. The police station was only 6 blocks away. "They're coming," I gasped into the phone. "Please hurry." Michael had broken free from Darren and was heading for the back door. "We have to go now." But Romy wasn't finished. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, her perfect composure finally cracking. 30 years of planning and you've ruined everything." 30 years? Darren stared at her in horror. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 18. Richard Caldwell was my first. I was just a kid then, didn't know what I was doing. But I learned. I got better." Her eyes were wild now, all pretense of sanity gone. "Do you have any idea how much money I've accumulated? How many properties, how many investments? I built an empire." The sirens were getting louder. Michael was frantically motioning for her to follow him, but she seemed frozen by rage and frustration. "It should have been perfect," she continued, advancing on us with the knife. "You were supposed to be so easy, Darren. Lonely, successful, trusting, just like all the others." "The others," I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite my terror. "How many others were there really?" 12, she said with pride. 12 perfect murders across 15 states, millions of dollars in assets. I could have retired after this one, disappeared to somewhere with no extradition treaties. 12 men, 12 families destroyed. The scope of her crimes was staggering. The front door burst open and police officers flooded into the house. "Drop the weapon! Get on the ground!" For a moment, Romy looked like she might fight, might try to spin one last lie. Then her shoulders sagged, and the knife clattered to the floor. "Rachel Morrison, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Morrison and conspiracy to commit murder." As they cuffed her, she looked directly at me with those cold green eyes. "You have no idea what you've cost me." "I know exactly what I've cost you," I replied. "My son's life." Michael was caught trying to escape through the backyard. His paramedic uniform and medical supplies made for damning evidence, especially when combined with the recording and documents I'd provided. As the police led them away, Darren and I stood in his living room, surrounded by the debris of what should have been his wedding day. The flowers still filled every vase, the wedding gifts were scattered across the floor, and somewhere upstairs, his tuxedo hung waiting for a ceremony that would never happen. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice breaking, "I almost married her. I almost—" "But you didn't," I said firmly, pulling him into my arms the way I had when he was a frightened child. "You're safe. That's all that matters." We held each other while the police photographed the scene and collected evidence. Detective Williams, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, took our statements and explained what would happen next. "Based on what you've provided, we'll be coordinating with law enforcement in multiple states. This could be one of the largest serial murder cases in recent history." "What about the money?" Darren asked. "Everything I signed over to her. Since the marriage wasn't legal, and since she obtained those documents through fraud, you should be able to recover most of your assets. It'll take time, but the legal precedent is clear. That evening, Darren and I sat on his back porch, watching the sun set over the yard where he'd planned to take wedding photos. The silence between us was comfortable for the first time in months. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I accused you of being jealous, of trying to control my life, but you were trying to save it. You don't owe me anything. You're my son. Protecting you isn't something I do for gratitude. It's something I do because I love you." He was quiet for a long moment. "How did you know? What made you realize something was wrong?" I thought about Sarah Morrison, who had died trying to warn me, about Thomas Morrison and the 11 other men whose families would finally have justice, about the pure luck that had led to Romy's phone being answered by someone who recognized her voice. "Sometimes," I said, "mothers just know. The investigation would take months, the trials would take years. But tonight, my son was safe. And that was enough." 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Rachel Morrison, her real name was actually Rachel Stevens, be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's voice was steady and firm as he read the charges: 12 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and bigamy across multiple states. Darren sat beside me, his hand covering mine as we listened to the families of her victims give their impact statements. Each story was heartbreakingly similar. A charming woman who had swept into their loved one's life, isolated them from family, and then systematically destroyed them. Mrs. Chen, David's elderly mother, spoke through tears about how her son had become a stranger in his final months. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. Rachel told him we didn't approve of their relationship, that we were trying to break them up. He died believing his own family had abandoned him. Marcus Webb's sister described how Rachel had convinced Marcus to cut ties with his siblings over fabricated drama. She made him think we were jealous of his success, that we only wanted his money. He changed his will to leave everything to her just weeks before he died. One by one, they painted a picture of a predator who had perfected the art of emotional manipulation. Each victim had been isolated, financially drained, and ultimately murdered when they were no longer useful. Michael Torrance, the paramedic who had been Rachel's accomplice, had already been sentenced to 25 years after agreeing to testify against her. His cooperation had been crucial in establishing the pattern of murders and revealing how Rachel had accessed the drugs used to kill her victims. When it was my turn to speak, I stood on shaking legs and faced the woman who had almost destroyed my family. "You tried to take the most precious thing in my life," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "My son trusted you completely. He would have signed anything you asked, done anything you requested, because he believed you loved him. That level of trust is sacred, and you turned it into a weapon." Rachel sat motionless throughout the proceedings, showing no emotion, no remorse. Even now, facing life in prison, she remained coldly calculating. "The families of your victims deserve to know that their loved ones didn't die because they were weak or foolish," I continued. "They died because they had the capacity to love and trust, qualities that make people human. You perverted those qualities into tools for murder." After the sentencing, Darren and I walked out of the courthouse together. The media was waiting, but we ignored their questions and headed straight to my car. "How do you feel?" I asked him as we drove away from the courthouse. He was quiet for a long moment. "Empty, I think. For months, I've been angry. At her, at myself, at the situation. But now that it's over, I just feel empty." I understood. The healing process had been long and difficult for both of us. Darren had struggled with guilt over the financial documents he'd signed, with shame over how completely he'd been deceived. He'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of psychopaths, learning to understand that his trust and love had been weaponized against him. "Dr. Peterson says that's normal," he said, referring to his therapist. "She says the emptiness is actually progress. It means I'm not carrying the anger anymore." We drove to the cemetery where we'd developed a ritual of visiting Sarah Morrison's grave after every court hearing. She'd been buried in a small plot next to her brother Thomas, two victims of Rachel's manipulation who deserved to be remembered. I placed fresh flowers on both graves while Darren stood quietly beside me. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Sarah hadn't called, he said. If she hadn't risked everything to warn you. But she did, I replied. And her courage saved your life. The investigation had revealed the full scope of Rachel's crimes. She'd been operating for over 15 years, moving from state to state, assuming different identities. Her real name was Rachel Lynn Stevens, and she'd grown up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. The psychological profile painted a picture of someone who had learned early that relationships were transactional, that love was something to be manipulated rather than experienced. She'd started with small cons in her teens, gradually escalating to marriage fraud and eventually murder. The prosecutor said she stole over $8 million across all her victims, Darren said as we walked back to the car. $8 million and 12 lives, all for money she never even got to enjoy. Money she'll never get to enjoy now, I corrected. Every asset she accumulated has been frozen and will be distributed to the victims' families. The financial recovery had been complex, but ultimately successful. Darren had gotten back his house, his business accounts, and his retirement savings. The life insurance policies had been canceled, and the property transfers had been ruled fraudulent. More importantly, he'd gotten back something Rachel had almost stolen: his ability to trust himself. We drove to our new tradition, Sunday dinner at my house, just the two of us. It was something we'd started after the arrest, a way to rebuild the relationship that Rachel had systematically tried to destroy. "I've been thinking about dating again," Darren said as I put the roast in the oven. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but he must have seen something in my face because he laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in months. "Not anytime soon," he assured me, "and definitely not without having you meet her first." Multiple times, with full background checks. "That's probably wise," I said, smiling despite myself. "Dr. Peterson says I need to learn to trust my instincts again. She says the fact that I ignored the red flags with Rachel doesn't mean I can't recognize them in the future. I just need to listen to that little voice instead of dismissing it." We spent the afternoon cooking together, talking about his therapy sessions, his work, his plans for the future. For the first time since this nightmare began, he seemed like himself again. My son, not the hollow-eyed stranger Rachel had turned him into. As evening approached, we sat on my back porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Mom," Darren said quietly, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. Even when I was horrible to you. Even when I accused you of trying to ruin my happiness. You kept fighting for me." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's what mothers do." Not all mothers. Some of Rachel's victims had family members who tried to warn them, but they gave up when they were rejected. You didn't give up. I thought about all the sleepless nights, all the moments when I doubted myself, wondered if I was truly saving him or destroying our relationship forever. "I almost did," I admitted. "There were times when I thought maybe I should just let you make your own mistakes even if they destroyed you." "What stopped you?" I looked at my son, 32 years old, successful, kind, trusting, and remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who believed his mother could protect him from any monster. "Because some mistakes you don't get to recover from," I said. And because I realized that sometimes protecting someone means being willing to have them hate you. We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The nightmare was over. Rachel Stevens would spend the rest of her life in prison, unable to hurt anyone else. The other victims' families had closure, and my son was alive, safe, and gradually healing. "I love you, Mom," Darren said suddenly. "I love you too, sweetheart." It had taken almost losing him to understand that a mother's greatest victory isn't being liked or approved of. It's being trusted to do whatever it takes to keep her child safe, even when that child can't see the danger. 6 months ago, I'd thought I was going to watch my son marry a woman who planned to murder him. Tonight, I was watching him reclaim his life and his future. Some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.